While people are collecting, there are one or two questions asked at your meeting. And I would like to say that difficulties arise, really, when one takes any subject, familiar subject, just on the ordinary level, ordinary life. And then, of course, it can at once be argued about and disputed. But things which we read from the Shankaracharya or other sources of importance are usually spoken of from just one point of view. They're spoken by realized men whose whole life depends on hearing the guiding voice of the self. Come and sit up in front. There's room out here. And there are certain things which the individual finds shuts off this guiding voice, and certain things which enhance it. We'll give you some examples of questions being asked in these meetings.
This is from Mrs. Moore's meeting. Could you say something more about one's individuality being one's most precious possession?
That again is something which one can only answer truly in the ultimate step of being completely merged with the self. One then finds that all along there's been something which is myself and no one else in the world. But at the same time one finds that all sense of ego and separateness has had to go. So it becomes a matter for dispute, whereas it can only be clearly stated for oneself at such a moment, or after such a moment, you see. It's not worth arguing about. Nevertheless, we find it of great importance that a person shouldn't get totally lost in life, shouldn't lose his sense of I am I. And the remark was occasioned by the fact that the true and essential part of one's feeling of individuality gradually expands and is purified so that it becomes the divine self, and then becomes the Paramatman, the self that lives in the heart of all. Whereas all the false part of it and the separate part of it drop off gradually, and you don't bother with them or pay any attention to them. Now there's another question which occasioned a bit of argument at Dr. Connell's group.
Yes, Dr. Arthur Connell's group. But it was round the question of servant. Miss Cassini said...
Well, first of all, Mrs. Ashbrook.
Mrs. Ashbrook said, I don't think we like the idea of servant today.
Very unpopular idea today.
Miss Cassini, I used to rebel against the idea of servant. I think of it now as humility, not thinking that you're the most important thing, not being egocentric, egotistical.
And here again, verbally, we're in a certain amount of difficulty. Because the Shankaracharya is always stressing that we are the sons of the Atman and of the same nature. When I first said goodbye to him in India, he said, never forget that the son of a lion is always a lion. And we are always the sons of the Atman, the divine self. The question of service arises because it's a way of escape from taking the results of one's actions to oneself. If you regard your actions as done for the service of the society, if you like, or the Paramatman, something which is not personal, then you carry on along the ladder. Whereas everything can be lost if one starts taking things to oneself. So the individual can say that his acts are in service, but I don't think we have to degrade ourselves into calling ourselves skivvies or something like that. I would rather like now that we meditated for a few minutes, because there's something rather delightful to read. Well, let us be together, let us talk together, let us meditate together, so that we will proceed happily together on the way. There are dozens of ways of implementing what's in your material this week, namely getting rid of 1,000 illusions about oneself and one's relation to other people and the world. One of the ways I want to speak about today was this big meeting. Is to stop thinking that we're special people who have a great destiny and unique and superior. And I'd like to read to you a little bit from a conversation that someone else in another group had with the Shankaracharya quite recently, which will amuse you and which illustrates it. He was speaking about the four ways. First, the traditional ways. He spoke about the man of action, the knowledge seeker, and the devotee, and said that they can all be meditated by personal ambition or desire. So they would always make claim to the results of their desires and ambitions. And that refers to the three traditional ways, all of which are some variant of those three. Man of action, knowledge seeker, and devotee. What the first Sri Shankara stressed in starting this Advaita or doctrine of unity, non-duality in India, was the necessity to remove that desire, that ambition, and those claims, so that through all the different ways, the will of the Absolute could be fulfilled. After all, the will of the Absolute is perfect, needing no modification, so why bother to have any other desire but fulfill that will? To have no personal desire is to accept the will of the Absolute. Having established this, one fulfills the complete life. There was an elephant, a king of elephants, who was large and mighty and proud of it. Once, when he went to the river for a bathe and a drink, he was caught by a crocodile, who dragged him into deep water where the elephant had nothing to hold on to. All his struggles were in vain. When he was almost drowned, he reached with the tip of his trunk and picked up a floating flower, and offering it to the Lord, he prayed for compassion and relief. The prayer was truly sincere, and the Lord responded by running past and striking the crocodile. So the elephant was rescued and came out of the river. Suddenly he saw a luminous body moving towards the higher heaven. So he asked the Lord what it was. He was told that it was the crocodile on his way to heaven. The elephant found this most surprising, for was it not he who had called God for help, and now God was taking his sinful aggressor up to heaven? And he begged for an explanation. God said, "You called me with an exclusive desire to save yourself, a desire which was duly fulfilled. But in the fulfilling of your desire, the crocodile was killed for no very good reason. He had to receive compensation, therefore, and this has now been arranged." He had to receive compensation, therefore, and this has now been arranged. So it would be marvelous to be the sort of people who, while we are persistent and ardent in trying to reach our own objectives, don't have any bad feelings or criticism of any other groups of people. It's difficult, and it's a thing that I suffer from a great deal myself, as you may have noticed. That it's possible, and if one does even a little of it, it really works. Although I hadn't read this at that time, last Wednesday there was a very enjoyable meeting with the 90 new people who to be given the meditation by the school in the School of Economic Science, who to be given the meditation here. And nearly always before, I've had a feeling of wanting to get something across to them, feeling rather superior, arrogant, feeling that there was room for improvement. This time I sent 50 days before, trying to eliminate that from my mind. And thinking only that here were these 90 excellent people, all wanting the meditation like anything, because there were no dissentient voices, and that it was one's duty as a servant to try and give them everything one could about what they wanted. And I think this principle is true all the way from very big things to very small things. One's own family life, for instance, and relations with one's nearest and dearest, one's children, and so on. But an attitude which happens to be free from illusions of separateness about oneself and always works. Well, now, are there any questions? In the paper, His Holiness is stressing that it's possible to give up something all the time, and the something is some illusion. Some of the many aspects of illusion about oneself. I do ask about this. I'm sure a lot of you have experiences of something of the sort, or
it seems to be connected with one's opinions about things. Yeah.
Yes.
Having opinions.
Yes. Built-in opinions, very often, due to one's environment since one was born, quite early on, that one sort of path one was born into, and all sorts of things that have happened since.
How is it, Dr. Lowe, that there's a little bit of stuff that is possible to give up almost everything?
Could I just hear that?
How is it that if there's a little bit of sattva, it's possible to give up almost anything?
Yes. That is, as you say, the secret. And the chief thing that gives one the feeling of I is the dominant part of the frontal lobe, the part that is concerned with speech and action, and whereas the non-dominant side, which is awoken to its proper position, is governed by sattva. So, whereas ordinarily we are governed by Rajas and Tamas, there's a very quick switch mechanism to the emotional side, which is interested in penetrating to the depths of one's being and not entirely concerned with the outside world. It's very quickly it can happen.
It means that never trying to rationalize about the development of the stomach. One has to stop.
Yes.
How does one operate that mechanism under the effect?
How does one operate that switch mechanism quickly under any circumstances?
By just doing it quickly, like turning on the light. If you stop to think about it, it just doesn't work. But the moment you catch yourself being Michael McEwen, switch quickly to the Paramatma, to something so much bigger, the source just of the Paramatma, something so much bigger that yourself just falls into insignificance. It's possible only if you do it quickly. More questions, especially from people who don't know all the answers already.
Dr. Law, don't we need some evidence in our lives about our conflict jobs and so on, because if we had, we probably would start speaking more than we do already.
Don't we need some illusions in ordinary life to give us confidence about doing our jobs and such like, Otherwise we'd be worse sailors than we are already.
Yes, don't worry about that. You'll always have plenty. And certainly one needs to be protected from the uncomfortable voice of conscience, which is very difficult to live with, by a certain protective illusion. But we needn't be afraid. They are the most permanent part of us, these illusions, and they drop off gradually only when you're not noticing it. Which particular one would you like to hang on to?
He wants to think about that for a moment.
But ask your wife. Other questions? One great illusion is that happiness comes from outside us and is dependent on conditions. And all around the world, people are rushing after what they hope may make them happy. One of the things which made this meeting on Wednesday was that we read again a paper which is supposed to stem from the Sufis. It's called The Alchemy of Happiness. And that name was coined by Al-Ghazali. So I thought we might read you a little at the moment, because undoubtedly the key thing that stops us from self-realization and the lovely moments we've met with are unhappy thoughts and unhappy feelings. Immediately one gets a good impulse, McCain, immediately one, as it were, comes to oneself, one should at once be happy and grateful for that, to the exclusion of anything else. It's what's really meant by the gospel story of the invitation to the wedding and the man who did not put on a wedding garment. The wedding garment is the feeling of gratitude and happiness at being invited to the wedding with the Absolute. So I thought that as quite a lot of you haven't heard this Alchemy of Happiness, we might read part of it, and I'll ask Mr. Alice to begin.
My subject tonight is the alchemy of happiness. The highest state of the soul is that in which it merges with the Supreme Self, in the Sanskrit language called Atman. This state brings happiness or bliss itself. Today, we often confuse happiness with pleasure. Pleasure is only an illusion of happiness, a shadow of happiness. And in this delusion, man perhaps passes his whole life seeking after pleasure and never finding satisfaction. Happiness is a state of the inner man and is not dependent upon outside things. The one who is happy everywhere, in a palace or a cottage, in riches or poverty. For he has discovered the fountain of happiness, which is situated in his own heart. Happiness cannot be bought or sold, nor can you give it to a person who has not got it. All religions and all philosophical systems have taught man in different forms how to find it. And wise men have, in some form or another, given a method and have called this process alchemy. The stories of the Arabian Nights, which symbolize these mystical ideas, are full of the belief that there is a philosopher's stone that will turn metals into gold by a chemical process. Gold stands for light or spiritual inspiration. A person who follows a religion and has not come to the realization of truth, of what use is his religion to him if he is not happy? A religious person must be happier than one who is not religious. If a person who professes religion is always melancholy, in this way, religion is disgraced. The form has been kept, but the spirit is lost. The whole process of making gold is described by the alchemists in a symbolical way. They say gold is made out of quicksilver or mercury. The nature of quicksilver is to be ever moving. But by a certain process, the quicksilver is first stilled. And once stilled, it becomes silver. The silver then has to be melted, and onto the melted silver, the juice of a herb is poured, and then the melted silver turns into gold. The real interpretation of this process is that mercury represents the nature of the ever-restless mind, realized especially when a man tries to collect his attention. Such is the nature of mind, it becomes more restless when you desire to control it. Like mercury, it is constantly moving. When, by collecting the attention, one has given the mind its true direction, one has taken the first step. But
You mustn't try and compress or stir the mind or put any restraint upon it, because it's also in the nature of the mind that if you try and restrain it, it at once rebels. So, although it hasn't come out in the translation, the restlessness is the scattered attention.
But for this one-pointed attention, a special method is necessary and is taught by the mystic, just as singing is taught by the teacher of voice production. Different methods are used in different schools. The simplest and most universal method is meditation, combined with the remembrance of the Supreme Self. When the attention is under complete control and the mind no longer restless, one can hold a thought at will for as long as one wishes. This is the beginning of phenomena. But some abuse these results, and by dissipating the power, they destroy the silver before turning the silver into gold. The silver must be heated before it can melt. And with what? With that warmth which is the divine essence in the heart of man, flowing out as sympathy, humility, and unselfishness in a stream of 1,000 drops. The moment this happens, the man really lives. He has unsealed the spring of happiness, which overcomes all that is jarring and inharmonious. After the heart is warmed by the divine element, which is love, the next stage is the juice of the herb, which is the influence of truth itself. In other words, the Supreme Self enters as the juice of the herb at this point. The love of truth alone is not sufficient. Knowledge of truth is necessary. Knowledge of truth strengthens man's belief in the truth, throws light on the individual and on life. Things become clear. Every leaf on a tree becomes a page of a holy book to one whose eyes are open to the knowledge of God. When the juice of the herb is poured onto the heart and warmed by the love of one's fellow men, then that heart becomes the heart of gold, the heart that expresses what God would express. This man has not seen God, but he has seen the reflection of God in man. And when this is so, then everything that comes from this man comes from God himself.
Many of you have heard that before, comes to heaven, but it connects with a number of things. It connects first and foremost with attention, and with all we learned from Mr. Zensky and our Western system about the three stages of attention. Attention scattered, like the quicksilver. Attention roused by emotion. But hardened by identification, by the feeling this is mine, and have rights. Get rid of that somehow, and the heart is melted. And then on the melted silver, the element of truth, the direct realization of truth, it is usually through emotion, but borne out by knowledge, can occur. Any questions about the here and now, not regarding this as a high and impossible ideal, it's just a formulation of our Western language, but regarding it as something which would give us what each of us wants.
Would it do? In one's everyday reaction to things as they come up, would calling on the Paramatman be enough to melt the silver?
No. For creating the habit of substituting the universal for the selfish and small. In one's thinking, at any moment during the day when one has attention to spare, or before going to sleep at night, so that it is your waking thought whenever you wake up. It takes a long time to create that habit. But that by itself doesn't melt the heart. The melting of the heart will happen when something apparently disastrous, or some great trial, or some difficulty comes to you, some illness, some rather desperate situation. And there are plenty in this life which, if you have already done some preparation, will melt your heart. Not only your own desperation, but somebody else's desperation. Usually triggered off by something happening in one's immediate environment, you see. So that with tragedies things that people regard as tragedies aren't really necessarily tragedies at all. You need to lots and lots of examples of that.
This is what we're talking about, illusion. A tragedy could be a blessing in disguise, if I could only see it.
Yes. If you can regard what habitually you would think of as a very awkward, horrid, unpleasant, or disastrous thing, as a blessing in disguise, given you for a particular purpose, then this will begin to have a capacity to melt your heart.
Would you not need to have some warmth when the tragedy takes place?
You are producing some sattva by your struggle to substitute the idea of the universal instead of Mrs. Fleming, the person. This is producing the warmth. And this sattva produced in that way is continually being stored up, so that suddenly, when occasion demands, your heart will be melted by the warmth which has then become a fire. And in some schools, they, of course, do this on purpose too. But my own experience of this, because we had rather tough upbringing in that way, is that it only made you extra cold. So there's rather an art about it, but I'll read you what they do in Zen school. It's a story called The Gates of Paradise. A soldier named Nobushige came to Hakuin, a teacher, and asked, "Is there really a paradise and a hell?" "Who are you?" inquired Hakuin. "I am a samurai," the warrior replied. "You, a soldier?" exclaimed Hakuin. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Your face looks like that of a beggar." Nobushige became so angry that he began to draw his sword, when Hakuin continued, "Oh, so you have a sword. It's probably far too blunt to cut off my head." As Nobushige drew his sword, Hakuin remarked, "Here open the gates of hell." At these words, the samurai, perceiving the master's discipline, seized his sword and bowed. "Here open the gates of paradise," said Hakuin. My experience is that lesser men had better not try that too much.
Are you saying that we can allow these crises to come along naturally?
Well, you can't stop them, can you? They come along. External crises, we can do nothing about it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear Mr. Hodge. Is it wrong to create such crises?
I think we've got quite enough. Quite enough. Let's make use of the ones we have. We and our friends, our families, our children. There's always somebody with a crisis, I find. And if you think that you're going to invite crises, I'm sure it's quite a wrong attitude. You could be doing something much better. You could be keeping attention. And if you were to keep attention while you were driving a car, there'd be far fewer crises and far fewer accidents.
Surely some of our difficulties are caused simply by wrong thinking, and we react to external circumstances and cause these difficulties.
It's Daphne Anderson, isn't it?
Yes.
It's absolutely true, of course, that nearly all our difficulties start through wrong thinking of some sort or another. And then our feelings get caught up in that, and the feelings are the things that have power and can change one's nature quite quickly. And we're warned that it doesn't matter making a mistake once, but we mustn't make the habit of making a mistake. We mustn't get into the habit of making a mistake. So if one finds a form of thinking which brings you mistakes again and again, take strong steps to put something good in its place. Could have words their decision. This idea of giving up is an inward process. You'll see in the material that's in the paper this week. He says you can always give up something intellectually and emotionally. This is what he's talking about. It's not at all the idea of giving up material possessions, especially other people's material possessions like your husband or your children. This is entirely an inward process. And it starts with giving up illusions.
Yes. Lady Susan says she really meant making plans in relation to one's life and then accepting what comes anyway.
No, but life would stop if you didn't plan buying a new house and trying to get interest. You have to put everything into this particular task that is your duty to do. You give up the illusion of being anything exceptional or very bright-headed or deserving of a medal when you've accomplished it, and all that illusory stuff one gives up. But one must be practical, and this is one's life, containing one's duty and responsibility. There really isn't any conflict except verbally. We've all got, I think, from the past, wrong ideas about this. That's why I'm bringing it up today.
question really was there not something very real behind Mr. Hodges' question? The questioner feels that there are times when one becomes in despair about moving in the work and feels that one needs a bomb to try and shift the hardness within oneself. And is this not really behind Mr. Hodges' question?
Yes, there was something very true about Mr. Hodges' question, and you're quite right. I think that we got rather used to think that one has to be hit by an iron bar or something. It isn't like that. If you find that between you and somebody who you look to in the school, a barrier has been built up, or even quite a temporary one, it's at that moment you could melt something. You see? You did it very successfully a little while ago, and that's one reason, because of what you did, one reason why I read the story of the elephant, disapproving of the crocodile going to heaven. But all the time one is building up barriers between oneself and the Shankaracharya by one's thinking and feeling it's not for me. One can, don't you think, Alan? Get somewhere by deliberately seeing this barrier and dissolving it. Getting an opposite process of thought established. But it's not violence, and he never fails to say that violence is not necessary. And if you have a choice, it's always the non-violent way of accomplishing something. Time goes on. We're still very much centered on the physical level, taking things on this level of body and its time scale, which is very long and slow. In the subtle world of psychology, things happen instantaneously. That's an answer to you, McCain. And if you act quickly, changing one thought or attitude to another, it's the only way to do it. Not to leave it for 5 minutes, or never to leave it till tomorrow. Always now when you catch it. Well, any last question? Supposing you were being dragged under the water by a crocodile, what question would you ask?
There's the nearest star.
Doctor, it's not so much the crisis that is happening, but it's the pleasure to do. And what to do, the times when you think that you are happy, and yet you know it. It's very hard.
Ms. Dodson says it's, in her case, it doesn't seem so much the crises as the pleasant illusions which are the trouble. Because you think you're happy then, and yet you know you're not, but you can't do anything about it.
No, well, we're asking what's going to push you into doing something when you wake up enough to realize that what you call happiness is not getting you anywhere. And we get many, many moments like that. We don't have to wait for big crises. But what do we do about these little moments, jokes, when you suddenly have a vague feeling that perhaps you are getting far the way you're going? You know? What do we do about this? The beginning of a good impasse.
Mrs. Belton says that that's what she's asking you.
But it's different in each case, and it wouldn't matter what I said. It's what you discover that counts. Well, I think that's about it. 25 too, and I hope you've had a slightly happy evening. I hope you get some more.